The thunderclap of splintering wood echoed across the Texas plains as Bronco's iron-shod hooves connected with the weathered church door. Coltrane Ashworth barely had time to pull back on the reins before his black stallion burst through the entrance like a force of nature, sending oak fragments flying into the shadowed sanctuary. What stopped Coltrane's heart wasn't the destruction, it was the small figure, huddled beneath the altar, wearing a pale blue dress with tiny forget-me-nots embroidered along the hem, the same dress his daughter Melody had been buried in 3 months ago. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, her auburn hair catching the filtered sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. She looked up at him with eyes the color of prairie grass, wide with terror, but holding something else, a flicker of recognition that made Coltrane's hands tremble on the leather reins. Bronco snorted and pawed the wooden floor, his massive frame filling the narrow aisle between pews. The horse had been acting strange all morning, refusing to head toward town, instead pulling toward this abandoned chapel that sat like a forgotten prayer on the edge of nowhere. Coltrane had fought him for miles before finally giving the stallion his head, trusting the animal's instincts that had saved his life more times than he could count. "Easy, girl," Coltrane whispered, though whether he was speaking to his horse or the child, he couldn't say. He dismounted slowly, his spurs jingling against the warped floorboards. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The girl pressed herself deeper into the shadows, clutching something to her chest, a small wooden cross that looked hand-carved. Her lips moved in what might have been prayer or simply fear, but no sound emerged. Coltrane noticed the way she favored her left leg, how her thin frame seemed almost translucent in the dim light. "What's your name, honey?" He crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. The badge on his vest caught the light. Sheriff of Copper Creek, a title that felt hollow as an empty grave since Melody's passing. The girl's gaze fixed on something behind him, and Coltrane turned to see what had captured her attention. There, carved into the back of the front pew, were initials surrounded by a heart, MA plus forever. His breath caught. Melody Ashworth. His daughter had carved those letters during one of their Sunday visits, back when his wife Cordelia was still alive, back when they were still a family. When he looked back, the girl was gone. Coltrane spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. The church was empty except for dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun and Bronco, who stood perfectly still, ears pricked forward as if listening to something only he could hear. "Where did she go?" Coltrane called out, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He searched behind every pew, checked the small vestry, even climbed to the choir loft. Nothing. No trace of the girl except for the faintest impression in the dust, where she had been kneeling. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and Bronco whinnied uneasily. Coltrane ran his hand along the horse's neck, feeling the animal's tension. Whatever had brought them here wasn't finished yet. As he prepared to mount up, something glinted in the debris near the broken door. He bent down and picked up a small silver locket, tarnished with age. Inside was a photograph of a man and woman he didn't recognize, but tucked behind it was a folded piece of paper with 2 words written in a child's careful script. "Help me." The locket felt heavier than it should in Coltrane's weathered palm. As he studied the photograph, the man in the picture wore a preacher's collar, his stern face dominated by deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. The woman beside him appeared fragile, almost ghostly, with the same auburn hair as the girl he'd seen in the church. Bronco stamped impatiently, but Coltrane was lost in thought. The abandoned chapel had been empty for 15 years, ever since Reverend Cornelius Blackthorne disappeared along with his wife and young daughter. The townspeople said they'd simply moved on, but there had always been whispers, dark rumors about the preacher's methods, about screams heard in the night, about a little girl who was seen less and less frequently until she vanished altogether. "We need to get back to town, boy," Coltrane murmured, though his instincts told him this mystery was far from over. He tucked the locket into his vest pocket and swung himself into the saddle. But as they rode away from the chapel, he couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching their departure. Copper Creek buzzed with its usual afternoon activity. When they arrived, Coltrane tied Bronco outside the jailhouse and headed straight for the town record's office. where Prudence Fairweather had been keeping meticulous documentation. For over 40 years, if anyone knew the truth about the Blackthorne family, it would be her, Sheriff Ashworth. Prudence looked up from her ledgers, her wire-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The choice of words made Coltrane's skin crawl. "Tell me about Reverend Blackthorne and his family. What really happened to them?" Prudence's expression darkened. She glanced around nervously before leaning forward. "Some stones are better left unturned, Coltrane, especially ones that might disturb the dead." "The dead don't worry me," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's the living I'm concerned about." With visible reluctance, Prudence retrieved a thick file from a locked cabinet. Cornelius Blackthorne came to Copper Creek in 1868 with his wife Evangeline, and their daughter Clementine. Seemed like a godly man at first. Drew big crowds to that little chapel. But things turned dark quickly. She opened the file, revealing newspaper clippings and handwritten reports. Evangeline was found dead in the church one morning, supposedly from a weak heart. But Doc Morrison, may he rest in peace, told me privately that her body showed signs of, well, let's just say, it wasn't natural causes. Coltrane's jaw tightened. "And the girl?" "Clementine was 8 when her mother died. After that, Blackthorne kept her locked away, said she was sick, needed special prayers. The few times people saw her, she looked like a scarecrow, all bones and fear." Prudence's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then one day, both of them just vanished. Church stood empty ever since." "What about the girl's body? Was she ever found?" "That's just it. Nobody ever looked for bodies. People were too afraid of Blackthorne, even after he disappeared. They just wanted to forget the whole ugly business." Coltrane studied a sketch of Clementine Blackthorne from a missing person report that was never filed. The resemblance to the girl in his daughter's dress was unmistakable, but that was impossible. The dates didn't add up. Clementine would be in her 20s now, if she were still alive. As evening shadows lengthened, Coltrane found himself drawn back to the chapel despite his better judgment. Bronco seemed eager to return, as if the horse sensed unfinished business. This time, Coltrane brought supplies: lanterns, rope, and his father's old hunting rifle. If there were answers to be found in that forsaken place, he intended to find them. The broken door hung at an odd angle, creaking in the wind like a funeral dirge. Inside, the church felt different, colder, more oppressive. Shadows seemed to move independently of his lantern light, and every step echoed with an hollow finality. He was examining the altar when he heard it, a soft humming coming from beneath the floorboards. A child's voice, singing a hymn he remembered from his own childhood. The same hymn melody used to sing while playing in their garden. Following the sound, Coltrane discovered a loose board near the pulpit. When he pried it up, the stench of decay and something else, something sweet and sickly, wafted up from the darkness below. His lantern revealed stone steps descending into what appeared to be a crypt. The humming grew louder, more insistent, against every instinct screaming at him to leave. Coltrane descended into the darkness, each step taking him deeper into a mystery that defied explanation and closer to a truth that might cost him his sanity. The stone steps descended far deeper than any church crypt had a right to go. Coltrane's lantern cast dancing shadows on walls that seemed to press closer with each downward step. The humming grew clearer now, definitely a child's voice, singing Rock of Ages in perfect, haunting pitch. The passage opened into a circular chamber carved from living rock. Ancient symbols covered the walls, not Christian crosses, but something older, more primal. In the center of the room sat a small table set for tea, with tiny porcelain cups and a child-sized chair. The humming stopped abruptly. "I've been waiting for you, Sheriff Ashworth," came a voice from the shadows. Coltrane spun around, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. There in the corner sat the girl from the church, still wearing Melody's blue dress, but something had changed. Her eyes held an ancient weariness that no 8-year-old should possess. "Who are you?" His voice echoed strangely in the confined space. "I'm Clementine Blackthorne," she said simply, then smiled with heartbreaking sadness. "Though I suppose I'm much older than I look." "That's impossible. Clementine disappeared 15 years ago. You'd be 23, the girl finished. Yes, I know. Time works differently when you're caught between worlds, Sheriff. When you're trapped by a father's madness and a mother's desperate love. She gestured to the walls around them. He built this place to commune with forces no Christian man should touch. Said he could bring back the dead, heal the sick, perform miracles. All he needed was the right sacrifice. Coltrane's blood ran cold. Your mother. Mama tried to run with me one night, but he caught us, dragged us both down here, and Clementine's voice trailed off, but her eyes told the rest of the story. He killed her first, said her pure heart would open the doorway. Then he came for me. But you're here. You survived. The girl laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Did I? Look closer. Sheriff, as if summoned by her words, Coltrane's lantern flickered, and in that moment of shifting light, he saw the truth. The girl's form wavered like heat rising from summer pavement. Behind her, scratched into the stone wall, were tally marks, thousands of them, marking the passage of days, weeks, years. I've been counting, Clementine said, following his gaze. 5,000. 475 days since Papa buried me next to Mama in this cold ground. Since he performed his final ritual and trapped my spirit in this place. Coltrane staggered backward, his rational mind reeling. This isn't possible. Ghosts aren't real. The dead don't usually speak to the living, she agreed. But your grief called to mine, Sheriff. Your daughter's death opened a door between us. That's why you could see me. Why your horse brought you here. Animals know things we've forgotten. She stood slowly, and Coltrane could see through her to the symbols carved in the wall behind. Melody visits me sometimes, such a sweet child. She says you blame yourself for her fever, for not getting the doctor in time. The mention of his daughter's name hit him like a physical blow. Just don't. She wants you to know it wasn't your fault. The fever would have taken her no matter what you did. Some things are beyond our control. Beyond our desperate attempts to hold onto what we love. Clementine walked to one of the walls and pressed her translucent hand against a particular stone. The wall swung inward, revealing another chamber. This one contained two coffins, one adult-sized, one heartbreakingly small. Papa thought he could cheat death, she said. Instead, he cheated us out of peace. Mama and I have been waiting 15 years for someone strong enough to help us. Someone who understood loss deeply enough to bridge the gap between life and death. In the second chamber, Coltrane found evidence of Cornelius Blackthorne's final moments journals filled with increasingly erratic handwriting, describing rituals and sacrifices that made his stomach turn. The last entry was dated 3 days after Clementine's death. The door is open, but I cannot control what comes through. God forgive me. I have damned us all. He tried to bring us back, Clementine explained, but the forces he unleashed turned on him, tore him apart, body and soul. We heard his screams for hours before blessed silence came. What do you need from me? Coltrane asked, though he dreaded the answer. The ritual that bound us can be undone, but only by someone with pure intentions. Someone who knows the weight of loss but hasn't let it corrupt his heart. She looked at him with those ancient, childlike eyes. Will you help us find peace, Sheriff? Will you help us go home? The weight of Clementine's request settled on Coltrane's shoulders like a shroud. Around them, the underground chamber pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made his skin crawl and his rational mind recoil. Yet looking at this child spirit trapped in an endless nightmare, he found his answer came easier than expected. Tell me what I need to do. Clementine's ghostly form brightened perceptibly. The binding requires 3 elements broken in reverse order, the symbol of faith corrupted, the blood sacrifice cleansed, and the imprisoned souls released through love, not fear. She led him to her father's journal, the pages yellowed and brittle. With age, Cornelius Blackthorne's handwriting grew increasingly frantic toward the end, documenting his descent into madness with clinical precision. He carved protective symbols into our coffins, Clementine explained, thinking they would keep us safe from the dark forces he summoned. Instead, they became our prisons, binding us to this place with chains stronger than iron. Coltrane studied the intricate patterns etched into the wooden surfaces. They weren't Christian symbols, but something far older, a twisted fusion of protective wards and binding spells that hurt to look at directly. Breaking them won't be enough, she continued. The blood spilled in this place must be cleansed with something pure. Papa used Mama's blood to open the doorway. To close it, we need life force willingly given. Coltrane finished, understanding flooding through him, not death, but life. You understand quickly for a man of this world, Clementine said with something approaching admiration. But the final element is the most difficult. The souls must be released through an act of perfect love without expectation, without trying to hold on to what must go. That last part cut deepest. Coltrane thought of Melody, of how he'd raged against her death, refused to accept it, clung to her memory until it became a wound that wouldn't heal. Was he ready to let go? Working by lantern light, they prepared the ritual space. Coltrane used his knife to carefully scrape away the binding symbols from both coffins, each stroke sending jolts of electric pain up his arm. The symbols seemed to resist destruction, the wood scarring and blackening as if burned. From his saddlebags upstairs, he retrieved his most precious possession, a small silver flask that had belonged to his grandfather, filled with water from the creek where he'd been baptized as a child. Holy water of a sort, pure intention made manifest. The blood cleansing comes next, Clementine said softly. But remember, Sheriff, this isn't about sacrifice. It's about choosing life over death, hope over despair. Coltrane drew his knife across his palm, letting the blood drip onto the stone altar where Evangeline Blackthorne had died 15 years ago. As his blood touched the ancient stains, they began to smoke and hiss. He poured the blessed water over the mixture, and the chamber filled with a sound like distant thunder. The walls themselves seemed to shift and breathe. Shadows danced independently of the lantern light, and somewhere in the darkness, Coltrane could hear whispered voices, not threatening, but grateful. Now comes the hardest part, Clementine said, her form becoming more solid, more real. You must open your heart completely. Hold nothing back. Let yourself feel all the love you have for Melody, then willingly release it into the world. Coltrane closed his eyes and thought of his daughter, not the pale, fever-ravaged child on her deathbed, but Melody as she'd been in life, laughing in their garden, chasing butterflies, singing hymns in her clear, sweet voice. The love welled up in him like a physical force, threatening to crack his chest open. Now let her go, Clementine whispered, not because you love her less, but because you love her enough to want her happiness more than your own grief. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, harder than burying his wife, harder than watching Melody fade away. But as he opened his heart and released his desperate grip on his daughter's memory, something extraordinary happened. The chamber filled with warm, golden light. Clementine's form solidified completely, and beside her appeared another figure, a woman with kind eyes and auburn hair, wearing a simple white dress. Mama, Clementine breathed, and ran into Evangeline's arms. The two spirits embraced, their forms growing brighter and more translucent simultaneously. They were leaving, Coltrane realized, finally able to move on. Thank you, Evangeline said, her voice like wind through wheat fields. You've given us the greatest gift of freedom to love without chains. As they began to fade, another figure materialized in the golden light, a small girl with dark hair and laughing eyes, wearing a blue dress with forget-me-nots embroidered on the hem. Papa, Melody said, her voice filled with joy. I've been waiting to say goodbye. Melody's appearance in the golden light stopped Coltrane's heart. She looked exactly as she had in life, vibrant, healthy, untouched by the fever that had claimed her. Her smile was radiant, free from the pain that had clouded her final days. My little star, he whispered, the pet name falling from his lips like a prayer. I'm not little anymore, Papa, she said gently, though her voice still carried the musical quality he remembered. I've learned so much since I crossed over, about love, about letting go, about why some people get called home early. Coltrane wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and never let go again. But something in her peaceful expression stopped him. This wasn't about his need. It was about her journey. I came to help Clementine and her mama, Melody continued, but also to help you. You've been carrying such heavy sadness, Papa. It's time to set it down. Beside them, Clementine and Evangeline watched with compassionate understanding. They knew the weight of unfinished goodbyes, the torture of love that had nowhere to go. I miss you so much, Coltrane said, his voice breaking. The house is so quiet without your singing. I hear your laughter in empty rooms and see your face in every sunset. And that's beautiful, Papa. Missing someone means you love them well. But you've been trying to keep me here with your grief, and that's not fair to either of us. Melody stepped closer, her form shimmering like starlight. I need to grow and learn and become who I'm meant to be. And you need to live really, live not just exist in the shadow of loss. The golden light pulsed stronger, and Coltrane felt something shift inside his chest. The crushing weight he'd carried for 3 months began to lift, not disappearing but transforming into something lighter, more bearable. Tell me how, he said simply. Remember the joy, not just the ending, Melody said. When you think of me, think of the times I made you laugh. Think of teaching me to ride, of bedtime stories, of Sunday mornings when we'd watch the sunrise together. Let those memories live and breathe instead of keeping them locked away. Like precious things too fragile to touch, Clementine spoke up, her voice stronger now. She visits the other children, sometimes the ones who cross over young. She sings to them, helps them not be afraid. Your daughter has become a shepherd of souls, Sheriff. Her compassion comes from the love you gave her. The knowledge that Melody was not just at peace but actively helping others sent a wave of bittersweet pride through Coltrane. Even in death, she was making the world brighter. There's something else, Melody said, glancing at Clementine and Evangeline. The work you did here tonight, it's not the end, Papa, it's the beginning. There are other trapped souls, other children who need someone brave enough to help them find their way home. I don't understand. Evangeline stepped forward. When Cornelius opened the doorway between worlds, he didn't just trap us. His actions created fractures, weak places where spirits can become lost or bound against their will. You have a gift now, Sheriff, the ability to see them, to help them. It's your calling, Melody added with obvious pride. You'll still be Sheriff, still protect the living, but now you can protect the dead too. You can make sure no child suffers what Clementine suffered. What I would have suffered if I died in fear instead of love. The chamber round them began to dissolve, the stone walls becoming transparent as the golden light grew brighter. Upstairs, Coltrane could hear Bronco whinnying, not in distress, but in recognition. The horse had always been sensitive to spiritual matters. Is this goodbye? Coltrane asked, though he already knew the answer. Goodbyes are for people who won't see each other again, Melody said with a wisdom beyond her years. We'll see each other again, Papa. When your work here is finished, I'll be waiting. But until then, live well, love well, help others find their way home. The 3 spirits were almost completely translucent now, ready to move on to whatever came next. Clementine waved shyly, no longer the terrified child he'd found in the church. Evangeline nodded gratefully. Her long imprisonment finally ended, and Melody blew him a kiss. The same gesture she'd made every night when he tucked her into bed. I love you, Papa, always and forever. I love you too, little star, always and forever. The golden light flared brilliantly, filling every corner of the underground chamber. When it faded, Coltrane stood alone in the darkness, but for the first time in months, he didn't feel empty. Instead, he felt purposeful, ready to carry on not just his own life, but a mission that would honor both the living and the dead. Above him, Bronco nickered softly, as if calling him back to the world of the living. But Coltrane lingered a moment longer, listening to the silence. It was peaceful now, no more whispered voices, no more restless spirits. The chapel's crypt had become what it should have been all along, a place of rest. Coltrane emerged from the underground chamber. As dawn painted the Texas sky in shades of gold and rose, the broken church door hung open like a mouth finally able to speak its secrets, and morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the empty pews. Bronco greeted him with a gentle nicker, the stallion's dark eyes holding an intelligence that seemed almost human. The horse had known, somehow. Animals always did. We've got work to do, boy, Coltrane murmured, stroking the horse's neck. Different work than I expected, but important just the same. The ride back to Copper Creek gave him time to process what had happened. The weight of grief still sat in his chest, but it had transformed from crushing despair into something more manageable, a reminder of love that could fuel purpose rather than destroy it. Melody's words echoed in his mind, "Help others find their way home." At the jailhouse, Deputy Marshal Flint Carradine was waiting with a cup of coffee and a worried expression. Flint had been Coltrane's right hand for 2 years, a steady man who asked few questions and got things done. "Sheriff, you look like you've been through a twister," Flint observed, taking in Coltrane's dirt-stained clothes and hollow-eyed appearance. "Where have you been all night? Learning about a new kind of law enforcement?" Coltrane replied cryptically. He poured himself coffee and sat heavily in his chair, suddenly exhausted. "Flint, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer. Honestly, have you ever seen things that couldn't be explained? Heard voices where there shouldn't be any? Felt like you were being watched by invisible eyes?" The deputy's weathered face creased in thought. "Well, since you're asking, there's been talk around town lately. Widow Prescott swears she sees her husband tending their garden at midnight. The Holloway twins claim there's a woman in white, walking the cemetery, crying for her lost children. And old Tucker at the saloon keeps setting out an extra glass for someone he calls the lonely drifter." Coltrane nodded slowly. It was starting already, the aftereffects of the spiritual disruption Cornelius Blackthorne had caused 15 years ago. The fractures Evangeline had mentioned were showing themselves, allowing lost souls to slip between worlds. "From now on, I want you to document any reports like that," he said. "Don't dismiss them as drunk talk or grief-induced visions. Treat them like any other case that needs investigation." "You really think there's something to these ghost stories?" "I think there are mysteries in this world that can't be solved with a gun and a badge," Coltrane replied carefully, "but that doesn't mean they don't need solving." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Copper Creek sat at the intersection of several old Indian trails, and it seemed the spiritual pathways followed similar routes. Reports came in from surrounding towns, children speaking to imaginary friends who gave unnaturally specific information about people they'd never met. Animals refusing to enter certain buildings, unexplained cold spots in the middle of summer heat. Coltrane developed a new routine. Days were spent handling normal sheriff duties, settling disputes, tracking rustlers, keeping the peace. But evenings and weekends found him traveling to places where the veil between worlds wore thin. Always with Bronco, always carrying the tools he'd learned to use: blessed water, iron nails, sometimes just his presence and willingness to listen. Not all the spirits were trapped by dark rituals. Some were simply lost, confused by sudden death or traumatic endings. Others had unfinished business messages for loved ones, confessions that needed hearing, debts of the heart that required settling. Coltrane became known throughout the territory as the sheriff who handled unusual cases. People would ride for days to report strange occurrences, bringing him stories that other lawmen would have laughed off. He never laughed. He investigated each report with the same thoroughness he'd apply to a murder case.